G'day you fabulous people, and welcome back to another episode with us here at DMW. Now today I'm going to be talking to you about the Y62 Patrol behind me and the 5 things I hate about this car. But the first thing is inside the car, so let's go check it out. Well, as I said outside the car there, we had to jump inside. Now it's a common thing that people actually talk about on a regular basis in these Patrols is the wood grain. Now, I like wood grain in lots of cars, but in this car, I just think there's too much of it. And it looks a little bit cheap. And I mean, the other thing that isn't my favorite either is the basic stereo system and the small screen. I mean, it's very, very outdated. I mean, for a 2021 model car, you would think that you would have a far better setup here in the dash. In the overseas models, this is unbelievably flash, like way flashier than a Cruiser or anything like that. And I mean, why can't us guys in Australia get the good stuff? That's one of my hates. Right, so another hate I've got, and look, it's not really a hate. There's pros and cons to having CVs front and rear. Now, the independent rear suspension as well as the independent front suspension makes this for an animal in certain circumstances off-road. But the thing I'm going to talk to you about, what I hate, are the CVs. Now, these things make so much power. I mean, you've got to be very, very careful with how you throttle these, or how you pedal these, I would say. It is because if you just give it too much right foot and give it too much bundy, I mean, these things are going to snap. The only time I've snapped a CV so far on this car, I was being silly. I was doing some donuts in the paddock and it was in the mud and it sort of got a bit shock loaded and I busted it. But that's my fault. So in general terms, if you're going to drive these cars sensibly, you are not going to have a problem with the CV. It's only when you start putting bigger tyres, driving it a little bit like Reuben, you know, and that's when you're going to have dramas with the CVs. But another thing I want to touch base on is that the Land Cruiser 200, Prados, Hiluxes, they're very, very simple to change a front CV. Now, on these Patrols, they are a little bit more difficult. You've actually got to pop the bottom ball joint out to actually get any sort of room to get the CV out. With the Toyotas, you've got 2 bolts you can undo underneath there and it all pulls away and you've got really, really good access. It's really, really quick. Nissan needs to do something similar to that, especially, you know, these are very popular for 4-wheel driving these days. And CVs are going to be a common occurrence that are going to get changed on the track, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. Now, I haven't done this yet, but apparently they break CVs in the back of them quite regularly as well. I mean, the rear CVs are a lot easier to change than the fronts, I've been informed, but I haven't actually done it yet, so I can't actually tell you how hard or what's involved in it because I haven't done it. But I've done the front one, and that's a separate video. That's a bit of a funny one, because it's all the things I did wrong, trying to work out the quickest way to get that CV out. So make sure you watch that video as well. Well, the third hate, or it's not really a hate. None of these are really, really hates, are they? But the third thing that I dislike about the Y62 Patrol is that I don't get to use the winch very often anymore because this thing is such an animal off-road, it just seems to drive everything. So I'm not doing as much winching and the big fun, you know, recoveries anymore. So, I mean, if that's what you can call a hate, because I'm really, really running low on things to talk about that I hate about this car. So, yeah, maybe this car is just way too capable. Well, number 4 on the dislike/hate list is the hydraulic shock absorbers on this car. So obviously they all run springs like all conventional vehicles, but these have an accumulator, and obviously all the hydraulic pressure goes through into that accumulator, and that's what stabilizes the car. Now, the Land Cruiser has the KDSS system and they do it a little bit differently. They do it on a really big sway bar system and it works absolutely unreal. But on these Patrols, they've got 4 individual shocks that actually have the hydraulic pressure go into them. And the rear shocks, the pistons in those apparently are just a little bit too small and they can't get the wallow out of the car. Now, in this one behind me, it's not much heavier than a standard wagon, so I haven't had to experience these big, horrible, wallowy things that people are telling us on YouTube and other people I meet about when they've got their car fully loaded with all the stuff. Now, I've put a big load in the back of this, and obviously, and I've had it at the 4.5 tonne. I actually haven't experienced it too badly, okay? But I've played with the pressures in there, and I mean, this is what we do here at DMW. We obviously modify these vehicles, but we haven't modified the suspension. We haven't modified the hydraulics at all on this car. We've just put the pressures at the higher range in there. Now, apparently, if you really flog these cars over some like melon hole stuff, you can actually bust out the hydraulic shocks if you've got the higher pressures in them. But if you drive these cars sensibly, I don't think you're gonna have those sorts of issues. I mean, it's not a big deal. We've got this car handling very well so far. But there are other companies out there in Australia here that are actually adding shock absorbers, normal conventional shocks, to the vehicle as well as the hydraulic shock absorber, and apparently that fixes it absolutely unbelievably. So look, if I start to have dramas, I'll probably shout out to those guys and we'll probably hook up, see what we've got to do to hook up the normal standard shocks to this vehicle. But it's a well-known thing that these Nissan Patrol Y62s have that drama, and I mean, if you guys have been researching them, you would have come across that as well. So that's my number 4 hate. And it's not a huge deal in my book, really, because it's, you know, a little bit boaty feeling at times, but that's, you know, that's just big cars in general. In my last hate, I spoke about the hydraulic suspension. Now, I'm going to be talking about the suspension again on my 5th hate about this car, and that's the wheel alignment issues with the independent rear suspension. Now, when you take this thing hard 4-wheel driving, it seems to knock the wheel alignment out every time. Now, look, the bigger tyres are going to exacerbate that and all that sort of jazz, but the system on the back of this car here isn't quite staunch enough for standard wagons or anything like that to keep the wheel alignment right there over a period of time of doing some, you know, gnarly tracks. And I mean, that's not going to affect a lot of people out there who are actually driving these vehicles in a normal sense, okay? But where we're taking this one here, it seems to knock the rear suspension out a fair bit, and you know, you've got to take it and get wheel aligned. But hey, for such an animal off-road, I tell you what, it's not really a big hate for me having to go get a wheel aligned, you know, every second or third go you go out, because, you know, I do that because I don't want to wear out the big expensive tyres. But, you know, all these hates are really disliked. How could you hate this car? Well, that sums up the 5 hates I have about this Y62. But look, I thought I'd throw something else in there as well. Probably the biggest comment I get these days is that this thing is way sexier than me these days. But anyway, I'll catch you on the next video, guys, and thank you very much for watching.